Good evening, everyone. It's Chair McAllister here. I wish to call this meeting to order for January 13th, 2021. There is one special mention that I would like to make, and it's a sad news. A Smith Falls District Collegiate Institute student, Zach Craig, 17 years old, grade 12, passed away earlier this week. I want to extend my sincere condolences to his family and to the SFDCI Red Hawks community. So I would ask you to please remember him in this minute of silence. Thank you. I would ask Derek now to play our national anthem, O Canada. Can I have it stand? Thank you, Derek. Director, would you please take roll call?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, trustees. This is our roll call for our public meeting of 13 January 2021. Trustee Barry.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Cram.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Danaher.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Jacobs.
Present.
Thank you. Vice Chair McPherson.
Present.
Thank you. Chair McAllister.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee McCray. Trustee McDonald.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Parisian. Trustee Schooler.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Swan.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Evans.
Present.
Thank you. And Trustee Hughes.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you, Director. I have a motion moved by Trustee Swan, seconded by Trustee Danaher, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve consent agenda items 5.02 to 5.04, January 13, 2021, as submitted. Would you please cast your ballots, please?
John, I'm online now. John McCrae.
Thank you, John.
Chair McAllister, that motion carries.
Thank you. Are there any conflict of interest declarations? Hearing none, I would move to 801. Director, would you have any comments to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, thank you for this opportunity to update the board on a number of happenings. And so it comes as no surprise to the board that operational matters are top and at the top of our mind and front and center of our work at this time. Members of the board will know that from December 21 last month until as late as yesterday, we have been informed of 3 operational adjustments to providing school programs to students beginning in December, where the province had provided a notice of a 28-day period commencing December 26th, when schools would be closed and learning would be committed to remotely. And Mr. Chair, as you know, there's a full report being provided to the board later this evening. And so details about those actions will be noted, but it does deserve recognition, and what does deserve some repeating is the fact that our principals, vice principals, and school staff, as well as our senior staff and central board office staff, have been hard at work to make sure that the transition back to learning after the winter holiday break would be as seamless as possible. And as well, you know, in terms of the subsequent adjustments that have been required for staff to make to from one operational state to another, our school staff and our system staff have been phenomenal to ensure that we can keep the learning in focus, keep families apprised of what that looks like given any kind of changes or adjustments. And this very quick cadence, this very quick sequence of change, we know that it's not what our students, our staff, our schools, our families are used to, but we certainly understand the pressing need from a public health perspective to be attentive to what the pandemic is demanding in terms of our time and focus and commitment. And the school board is certainly one of those community agencies that can be counted upon to do our part, to do the right thing, and to support the larger health of the community. And we'll do everything we can to be partners in that desirable outcome. Mr. Chair, I'll just sort of cap it off there because I know that you have some comments as well, but I do want to welcome our staff back, our students back to learning, and to thank them for their patience as we adjust to the external circumstances of what's happening in our communities, our province, and the larger world. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you, Director. I have a few comments, and it obviously pertains to the difficult situation in which we find ourselves. We are in a state of emergency in this country and this world of ours. And there's no doubt that for some, this is more of a challenge than for others. I'm thinking of young students who are working through lessons without the constant presence of their friendly teacher and educational worker. The older students who miss their friends and the social life and their sports. Parents who are trying desperately to work from home and help their children. The folks who do not have reliable internet connectivity. And finally, the victims, their families, and the frontline workers in various sectors, not the least of which would be our own teachers and educational workers and our staff. There are numerous resources available for parents, teachers, and students. The first is Kids Help Phone for students who need to chat with someone. This number is 1-800-668-6868. This is a highly recognized chat line for kids, and I highly recommend it. The second is the Student Health Action Kit from School Mental Health Ontario. It is a valuable resource for parents, teachers, and students. And this resource promotes wellness in challenging times, supports mental health learning, and encourages early help. For example, units deal with understanding anxiety, breathing exercises, stretching exercises, and using positive distractions. The site and action kit can be found on Twitter at SMHO_SMHO, and on YouTube and on the web at www.smho/smho.ca/COVID-19. I hope this is, there are many other resources, but I hope these two at least will be of some help for those who might feel that they could use them. I want to conclude by a quotation from the Religious Leaders of Canada, and it reads as follows. In spite of present sufferings, which can seem overwhelming at times, the flames of hope cannot be extinguished. Let us witness hope to each other and become beacons of light during these uncertain times. And may this message guide us. I would now move to Article 1001, which is the report of the Executive Search Bid Subcommittee. And I just have a very brief report. And this is mainly for public consumption, but at the meeting of December the 16th, 2020, Director Sliwa gave notice to the board of his intention to retire on June the 30th. That retirement was accepted with sincere regret. Subsequently, I was directed by the board to initiate a candidate search. A subcommittee of the board was formed to solicit, establish a process, and evaluate firms which have been invited to bid for this responsibility. That committee has met 2 times. I have provided trustees with this detailed information concerning the process, the timelines, and the scope of work. I will now move to 1002, which is a report of the Special Education Advisory Committee, and I will turn this over to SEAC Chair, Trustee Vice Chair Bill McPherson.
Yeah, I guess I'm one of them. Anyways, our SEAC met again. Just let me flip back here to get the date. Okay, we met on the 5th of January 2021, and we met virtually, and have to admit we're getting all good at that. The first thing off the list was the election of the chair and the vice chair for SEAC, and I have been returned as chair as well. Deb Woods has been returned as vice chair. The next thing that we did, and I have to admit this was an excellent meeting. Chair McAllister attended as a guest, answered a couple of pertinent questions for our committee. Next thing we talked about, and this was presented by Drs. Inglis and Armstrong, we reviewed the Upper Canada District School Board Mental Health Strategic Plan, and there's more details in your report. We then reviewed 2 more sections of our Spec Ed plan with an eye to having it completed by the end of June, as well as Superintendent Perry updated us on the impact of the latest province-wide restrictions, so to speak, and explained to us how the criteria for high needs special education students attending in person rather than remotely. Anyways, that's my report, and if there's any questions, please feel free to ask them.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Have you, trustees, any comments or questions about this report? Hearing none, I would like to congratulate and recognize Trustee McPherson on his election as chair at SEAC. By all reports, he is doing a wonderful job there, and I wish him well. And thank you, Bill, for serving.
You're welcome.
I'd like to move on to 1101, which is this comes up annually. It's our annual 2021-22 board memberships. I have a motion moved by Trustee McDonald, seconded by Trustee Cram, that the Upper Canada District School Board renew the 2021-2022 memberships for the Ontario Public School Boards Association. Trustee McDonald, I don't know if you would like to speak to this, but you are free to do so if you wish.
Sorry, Chair, I just had to get the mute button. The only thing I'd like to add is that there is value in what OPSPA brings to the table on an annual basis. That value has been questioned though over the last little bit with as a result of COVID in our inability to meet in person. However, they have been trying to make every effort to ensure that trustees are meeting and getting professional development. Hence is the case in I think 2 weeks time, where we'll have a modified version of our public education symposium. There also is some, I guess, some other pieces associated to OPSPA that benefit our board when it comes to energy discussions, some things around negotiations at a provincial level, obviously, but a number of resources as well that are available on their website that boards and trustees can use in their professional development. So happy to answer or respond to any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Trustee McDonald. Are there any questions with regard to these board memberships?
I just have a comment if I could.
By all means, Vice Chair.
I really appreciate them going virtual. I think it was about 4 weeks ago I attended a session. It was a bunch of trustees from across the province. The other thing I really appreciate is the opportunity to attend the public education symposium without having to travel to Toronto. Not that I have anything against Toronto, but it's really nice to see that they've made the shift to virtual. Maybe it's not going to be part of the future, but it's certainly nice to enjoy them right now.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Hearing nothing, I will ask you to cast your vote online, please. I'm voting in favor. I can't seem to get out of the screen.
Question.
Here I am.
More of a suggestion, I guess, or a question. ASACO, do they have a constitution or is it just their vision statements?
Director, would you an answer?
Yes, of course, Mr. Chair, through you. They do have a constitution as part of a elected entity and as a way of providing a terms of reference for their activity.
Okay, a follow-up question, Chair?
Yes, by all means, go ahead.
It's just a procedure. I've got no problem with the motion. At the bottom of the report, we did list the constitution of OPSPA, but we haven't listed the constitution of ASACO. And if we're going to pay the membership fees to both of them, perhaps we should have the constitution just at the bottom for reference as well.
Trustee
Okay.
Cram? Sorry, Trustee Cram, I can answer that question for you. On the OSTA-ACO website, the Constitution is actually virtual, so I did try to download it, but in the future I can maybe copy and paste and put it into a Word document, but there is a link in the landing page for OSTA-ACO Constitution and bylaws, if that helps.
Thank you.
Lisa, have we cast our ballots yet? If not, could you bring it up again, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that motion does carry.
Okay, thank you very much. There is a second motion related to this, and it's 1101, 2021-2022 board memberships. I have a motion moved by Trustee Barry, seconded by Trustee Danaher, that the Upper Canada District School Board renew the 2021-2022 membership for the Ontario Student Trustees Association. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, please cast your ballots. I'm in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
In favor?
Mr. Chair, that motion carries.
Thank you. We will now move on to 1102, which is the graduation rate and student achievement update. And I would turn this over to both the director to lead off and to Superintendent Coombs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, trustees will recall, Mr. Chair, that the graduation rate has been a primary pillar of the board's strategic planning for quite some time. In the current strategic plan for the board, the 90% graduation rate has been a target for the 3-year period of 2017 to 2020, recognizing that the graduation year of June 2020 was and has been since the board's inception of this target, was to be the primary benchmark for confirming where the school district was at in terms of reaching this aspirational goal. So, Mr. Chair, tonight Superintendent Coombs is bringing a presentation at 2 levels. One is to help to illuminate for the board the current state of that graduation rate, given a couple of metrics of looking at 4 years, 5 years, and beyond the 5-year period where students do continue their learning, and at the request of the board to bring some insights in terms of data and results with respect to that span. And then secondly, Mr. Chair, trustees will recall that late last fall, there was a request from the Board of Trustees to update the board with the closure of Quadmester 1 for this new school year to get a bit of an early insight about how our secondary school students navigated this new year. We have lots of questions, of course, and some of those we hope that we're answering this evening in some different reports about how did people respond to that change in the return to school, and in terms of different options for learning, and how is that playing out at home. The last question will be answered in a report later this evening, and Mr. Coombs will be looking at the first 2 questions about how did our students respond to the Quadmester 1 experience in general, and then specifically by different types of learning options that they had. So we'll turn this over to Superintendent Coombs. We've been looking forward to this presentation for some time, Mr. Chair, and we're glad that we can bring this to you. Over to Superintendent Coombs.
Thank you very much, Director, and good evening, trustees, and through you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here tonight virtually to be able to bring you an update on our graduation rate. And as the director mentioned, this is going to be a little bit different in that I'm also going to talk about student achievement data going back almost a year. And as you'll recall, of course, it was almost a year ago when the pandemic first hit and schools were shut down. And I know there certainly is a lot of interest out there about how our students responded and how our teaching staff also also responded to the pandemic, the shutdown, the return in September to more of a hybrid model. And again, we are in a second shutdown period. And so I'll be talking to our graduation rate first and reporting on the success rates of our last two cohorts of students. Next slide, please. So as you'll see here, this is sort of an overall view of where we've been over the past few years in our efforts to reach the 90% graduation rate. As you'll see, we started out in the low 80s. We are anticipating from June of 2020 a graduation rate of 86.3%. Still certainly short of our ultimate goal, but we are improving on a year-by-year basis. I'm going to break that down a little bit for you over the next couple of slides and tell you sort of where the students were, where they are now, and also where our current fifth-year cohort is, how they are progressing through this particular academic year as well. Next slide, please. So this would be our graduating cohort from last June of 2020. So this would be the cohort of students who were in their fifth year, who were not able to complete their academic journey face to face, but still were able to complete and graduate over the course of those months when we were in shutdown. As you can see, we first look at our grade 9 cohort from September of 2015. That's our cohort that we track. And as you can see, we had 1,934 students begin with us in September of 2015. We had 1,455 of them graduate after 4 years. We had another 122 students graduate at the end of their fifth year with us, with a total graduation of 1,577. Now, 141 students left our board for other boards in Ontario that we can track. We don't know how they did yet. However, we project out based upon a historical completion rate of around 66% that we would end up at 86.2, 86.3%. And so that would be the higher mark that we have reached, the highest mark that we have reached, but still, of course, short of our 90% goal. I also want to mention that we do have students who are working towards certificates of achievement. These are students with special needs who are not working towards 30 credits in a graduation diploma, but certainly that certificate of achievement is important. They still count towards our graduation rate. And we still have a number of them still with our school system, we certainly, of course, still continue to work with them. And in some cases, they are able to get that 30 credits, of course, and we work with them on an individual case-by-case basis. When I look at the early leavers, those are students from the original cohort of 1,934 who have withdrawn, left us, and their last known school was with us. It has not been requested from another board in Ontario, and so we're not quite sure where they are. They may have left the country or they may have left the province, but at this time we don't know. Also still, I think important to note, we have 36 of those students who were in their fifth year last year have returned and are continuing their journey with us towards that graduation rate. Next slide, please. Oh, I think you went one too far there, Derek. Sorry about that. Could we go back one more? Thank you. So this is our current fifth year cohort. So this is the year that we're the students that we are tracking. They are in their fifth year. They have not graduated yet. And as you can see, that cohort size is a little bit smaller. We had 1,840 who began with us in September of 2016. We had 1,424 graduates. 15 of them graduated at the end of Quad 1, and I'll be talking about Quad 1 success rates in a moment, for a total of 1,439 grads, meaning we have 78%. Now, it's important to note that we are still tracking 128 students who are in their 5th year working towards graduation, and obviously we are paying particular attention to them. We have approximately 100 early leavers, and we have 25 students currently with us that are working towards that certificate of achievement, which I spoke about earlier, and 121 students who have left the Upper Canada board but are with another board in Ontario, and of course still count towards our graduation rate. So this is really important for us to note, because we are making improvements in earlier graduation rate. And as I've mentioned and has been brought to the table before, the most important thing is to try to get that 5th year cohort smaller. That means we have more graduates at the end of their 4th year, which means we need to start and ensuring that we are intervening with students at risk earlier and earlier in their academic career when they most need it. Now the next slide, please. I think it's important to note, again, that 4-year graduation rate is really important to us. And as you can see, the cohorts over the past 4 years, we have been steadily improving our grade 12 graduation rate from 73.4 4 years ago to 77.4. That's really important because we know that we need to get that grade 12 graduation rate up to at least 80% to have that real opportunity to hit 90% with that 5th year cohort. So we are heading in the right direction, but we're not there yet. We need to continue to work towards getting more students graduated at the end of their 4th year with their peers, so we don't have that many students to work with in our 5th year cohort. Thank you, Derek. Next slide, please. This is a comparison of cohorts, and we did want to point out that while the provincial graduation rate certainly still is the 5th year cohorts, that those who graduate after 5 years or less, we still continue to work with and track students who stay with us through their journey. And as you know, students can stay with us for 7 years in a secondary role before they would have to transfer over to adult education. And as you can see, we still have a number of students who have continued with us, mostly at TR Leger, into their 6th and 7th and even 8th year. A good question to ask is, well, so what do we do? What kind of supports do we provide for them? And so while our graduation coaches and our student success teachers work predominantly with those between in their 4th and 5th year, and certainly right down to grade 9, we still pay particular attention to those that are still working towards their graduation. It's interesting to note, right now, anecdotally, it would appear that more students are staying for that 6th year that have had contact with a graduation coach student success team that is working with them. And we're looking at some hard data on that, because we want to make sure that everybody understands that even if they haven't been successful in 5 years, that we still work towards them towards achieving their goals. And certainly the first goal being a graduation diploma from high school. Next slide, please. So we had talked about when we shut down in March of 2020, when schools moved from face-to-face to online learning. We set these 3 goals for our learning at home. And I think it's important to remind everybody that first and foremost, our goal was to make sure that each and every one of our secondary students made it across the finish line, had every opportunity to complete the credits which they had begun at the beginning of that semester. So on that note, I'm going to be reporting on how the kids did last year comparatively, and how they're doing in quad 1 from this year, and how do the different modes of learning impact upon their success rate. Next slide, please, Derek. So this is a comparison between semester 1, which was face-to-face, everything was normal, and then semester 2, of course, 6 weeks into the year, all of a sudden pandemic, and we are all learning remotely from home. And so as you can see, our success rate in that semester 2, which was mostly remote learning, was significantly better than semester one. As you will note, that on each and every grade, more students completed successfully their credits at the end of semester two when we were locked out. Now, certainly there were a number of changes to not just to the pedagogy, which we had to implement, but also the assessment of that. And certainly our student success teachers and our grad coaches worked very hard with all of those students to keep them engaged. Our biggest worry, especially in early April, when we knew that this was going to be a long-term shutdown. Initially, it was only 2 weeks. In April, when we began to realize that this probably would go all year, we made a really concerted effort in every school to ensure that we had reached out and connected at least on a weekly basis with those students to ensure that they were still engaged, that they still understood what they had to do to complete their semester, and that we were providing any kind of assistance that we could. And so I think that's a success story, and certainly it speaks to the hard work of our staff, our administrators, and certainly our teachers in ensuring that our students did indeed make it to the finish line of that semester. Next slide, please. You know, what's really interesting is when we began Quad 1, first of all, we instituted a quadmester pilot, and that was the first time we've ever done anything like that. It was brand new, and certainly that hybrid model where some students were going to learn remotely, some students learning synchronously from home, and some students face-to-face in a quadmester model certainly was impactful. However, as you can see, the success rate from Quad 1 is still pretty substantial. I'm especially happy to see that grade 12 success rate. And as you saw from semester 1 in the regular year, we had a much lower success rate in the grade 12s. I think this speaks really well to the efforts of our teachers, certainly our administrators, in working hard to make sure that we were connecting with all our students. So a good question to ask at that point is, so we had some students learning remotely, off-site, we had some students learning face-to-face, and we had some students learning synchronously with their teacher in class in their schools. What was the comparison of success rate? And that's the next slide, please, Derek. So as you can see here, the remote learners actually had a lower success rate than those that were learning in school or synchronously with their colleagues in school, with their peers. This is now this data is as of about mid-December, maybe the second week of December. We still were working at that time on credit rescue efforts with some of those students who simply ran out of time, who maybe either didn't begin their remote learning with everyone else, maybe began a bit late, maybe switched over. So we want to ensure that everybody gets that opportunity. But as you can see, the success rate was less for those learning remotely than those learning synchronously with their peers or those learning face-to-face with their teacher. And there are several things we are doing to ensure that that success rate for remote learners in the second quadmester and third and fourth improves, which I'll be talking about next. Next slide, please, Derek. We've added to the student success personnel in the remote schools for quads 2, 3, and 4. And while the quad 1, we had our administration and our teachers working very hard and diligently with those students, we wanted to make sure that we had set aside enough personnel to track students that were really struggling and to reach out to them earlier in the quadmester. And as you know, quadmesters are 8 or 9 weeks long. You don't have a lot of time. And so when they start falling behind early, we need to jump on it and make sure that we're providing them with encouragement and support and resources so that they can be successful. It's also important to note that we're strengthening that bond between the home school and the remote school so that there's regular communication between the administrators, student success team of the remote school and the student success team of the home school, really tightening up that that connection so that there's more support being offered. We also know that some students who begin in remote may switch at the end of a quadmester back to face-to-face. We want to make sure that we are picking that up and that there's not a gap that kids can fall through. We are, of course, working hard to ensure that we have a pathway for graduation through the entire 4 quads. And so usually, again, when we plan with guidance counselors, we set that up semester to semester, ensuring that the requisite courses are achieved and are available to students. This is a little bit more difficult when you have some students remotely, some students learning face-to-face, and trying to link that up and making sure we have a clear pathway is really critical. Credit recovery continues through quad 1. That will continue through quad 4. We need to make sure that that credit recovery and credit rescue effort is applied to grade 9, 10, 11, and 12, and that everybody has equal access to that. It's really critical because with everything going on in the world, the new shutdown, certainly the disruption to family life and in communities, it is important. It's never been more important to ensure that there's proper support for everybody. We are working closely because a lot of our students, especially those fifth-year students, many of them are working essential jobs. Some of them working 30, 40 hours a week. They're working at our grocery stores, at our gas stations, at our hardware stores. Because of that, there are opportunities to recognize work experience with credits. It means we can accredit the work that they do like a paid co-op just have them do self-reflection. They can meet the curriculum requirements from the co-op document and gain those important credits towards graduation. And also, you know, one of the things that we did very early in the pandemic back in April was we started connecting with our student success teams and our grad coaches weekly. Before, during in pre-pandemic world, we would meet on a month-to-month basis. We would bring students forward. We would share strategies. As soon as the pandemic hit, we met weekly. So those were schools across the board meeting every week. And what we would do is individual student success leads and the grad coaches would bring kids forward and say, this is a particular situation. Here's what I'm trying. Is there anybody that can give me further assistance? And that connectivity has really been critical because every student is different. Every school, every student can chart their own pathway. We have to make sure we're applying all strategies that are necessary to ensure that they are successful. And certainly, I just want to put a plug on that we are collecting more data than we ever have on at-risk youth. And we do see this student achievement during a pandemic as an equity issue that we have to make sure, regardless of whether kids have great broadband at home or all the devices or no devices, that they all have an equal opportunity to be successful. And gathering that data on an ongoing basis will always be really critical and important, and we are working hard to improve that on an ongoing basis. One of the major downsides of having a quadmester model is that there's no midterm report cards. And so what we need to do is ensure that we are reaching out and getting whatever data we can earlier so that we can then intervene on an early basis going forward. Next slide, please. And Mr. Chair, that is my presentation for this evening. Now certainly would turn it back to you for any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Coombs. That's a great report. I would open the floor to questions.
Mr. Chair, John McCrae.
Go ahead, Trustee McCrae.
David, I think I've got the right slide, but it perhaps is number 8. It's quad 1 student achievement in school versus remote. And it seems that obviously the in-school / synchronous has done somewhat better. And I'm wondering if you have the data to differentiate between the in-school and the synchronous. Lovely.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. That's a great question. We don't have that data yet because we can't easily parse that out of our information system to determine who is synchronous and who is non-synchronous. But that is something that we are working on for quad 2. And so the next time I bring this forward, I will be able to bring that data forward to you.
Thank you very much.
Superintendent Coombs, I would like to follow up on Trustee McCrae's question. The implications are pretty staggering, in my opinion, and it begs the question: why are not more students and parents choosing the in-school synchronous learning, or do they know this?
Well, Mr. Chair, this is the first time we brought this this data forward in this forum, obviously. It's certainly a question that we have. You know, I think it really depends upon the circumstances of the family, what their preference would be, what their learning preference would be. I think our task at this time, and certainly working with my colleagues, Superintendent Rudders, Superintendent Loshaw, you know, we really want to try to make all their experiences, whatever they choose, to be successful ones. And so certainly we're watching our quad 2 success rate very, very carefully. As you know, we've only got a couple of weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks left of quad 2, and then we're into quad 3. And so certainly we want to make sure that that is presented to all our parents, all our students, that they understand that they do have that choice.
Thank you very much. Vice Chair McPherson, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. First off, a comment. Thank you for acknowledging our hardworking TR Leger students in your report. And secondly, the question. In the past, we have enjoyed the availability of a very successful co-op education program. What's the status of the co-op education during the COVID crisis, so to speak?
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. Great question. Co-op has never been more important. And so back in when we first shut down in March, we essentially co-op became virtual. And so what we did was we have a couple of really, really excellent student learning partners who work specifically with specialist high skills major, youth apprenticeship, and co-op experiential learning, Ashley Grant and Lauren Levac. And Ashley and Lauren worked very hard to create a site which is built out of teams just for co-op educators. So, because a lot of co-op educators are saying, what do I do now? It's March, it's April, we've got 2.5 months left, and I've got kids who simply can't go to work. What do we do? And so we created, as much as we could, virtual experiences. We also made available for free of charge a lot of certification opportunities. So certification like your health and safety online, your boater's exam online, hospitality certifications online. And also there's a number of tech courses which we moved online virtually so that teachers could use those kind of activities and keep kids engaged in co-op learning and meeting those expectations. When we came back, we were able to come back in September to co-op learning in some cases. The only restriction was, of course, long-term care homes, for example, hospitals we didn't have, but other co-op resumed. Of course, when we shut down again a couple of weeks ago, again, our co-op went online and virtual. But this time, because of the experience in the spring, we have a really rigorous and a significant compilation of activities that co-op teachers can go to and share those kind of resources. The term subject council, some of you may remember that. It's kind of like the old subject councils, but it's virtual, it's online, and people are sharing their activities. And as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, we can also take paid learning opportunities that kids have achieved over the course of even in the summertime, and then have kids complete a virtual package, and we can accredit their experience. And I think that's really critical. One thing we've realized through this pandemic is that essential workers are truly essential, and a lot of our kids are doing that work, and they are now being accredited towards graduation for that. So we haven't given up on our co-op ed. In fact, it's become incredibly important going forward, and it will continue to be so.
Thank you.
Trustee McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to go to, I think it's slide 1. I'm just sorry. Slide 2, I guess, with the bar graph. And I guess I really don't have a question. It's more of a comment. And what I wanted to really bring to light is that although we didn't hit 90%, what this graph really shows is the progression that we've made. And 90% graduation rate for us is measured according to the province, the 4 and the 5 year cohort students. So it's not an indictment on our students if we don't hit 90%. This is an indictment on us as an organization. The goal to align with our mission and vision that we've talked about in the past, is achieving a graduation rate of 90%. We want our kids to be successful. We want our kids to graduate within a defined period of time so that they can go out into the world and be successful. Because if it takes them longer to do that, they still may be successful, but we've got other kids that have also graduated ahead of them and are going to have that leg up. And so it's an indictment on us when we aren't able to achieve our goals. The strategies that Superintendent Coombs talked about tonight are, there's more strategies that we put into this over the last couple of years, and we're using more data than we've ever had. I don't want to make this a situation that we weren't successful in 90%. It's the reality. But what I want to talk about is and highlight is the fact that we've made great progression from where we started, and we do have strategies in place. And are there other strategies that we can use? Absolutely. And I think that's the important piece, is that we are identifying other ways, new ways to look at how we can get our students across the line and be successful. And for us to be able to acknowledge that and work with that information and bring it to budget so that we can support those types of things through our most important piece of work at the board table is providing funds through the budget to be able to put programs in place. I think we've done well to get to where we are, and I think the pieces that we're seeing tonight show that there are a number of students that are on the cusp. So there's 128 students and 120 students that are moved to other boards. That's good, and if we can get 100% of those kids, we're going to be even better. Now, we've got a lot of work to do whenever that happens. I think the important thing for us as well that we need to acknowledge and put some more work into is the early leavers. That's a disappointment, because as an organization, we want to see our students stay with us, continue with us, and be successful. And so when we've got 100 students that are leaving through that cohort, that means that we've got 100 students who potentially we lost, right? They fell through the gap. And those are the students that we need to make sure that we're starting to pay attention to as well and find ways to do that. I know that Superintendent Coombs, you've talked about strategies. I know staff from CCVS, when we have absences, they're making contact. So there's lots of different things that are happening in different areas, and I hope that we have more reports and more information to show the strategies that we're going to implement to help with those recovering those students that might have been early leavers and trying to getting them back into our system. So, for me, it's not where we want to be, but it's getting closer to where we want to be, and I'm glad that we're making that progression, and I'm happy to hear what the strategies that we're putting in place that we're going to be even closer than we were the previous year. The other thing that I want to on that first slide is that we've closed the gap considerably between the board and the province. 2015, 2016 was a really crucial area where that gap was pretty big, and we've closed that, and I think we're going to get even closer from the work that we're doing and the strategies that we're implementing to make sure that our kids are successful and are able to get across the line, and we're living our vision and our mission. So great work to get us to where we are. I look forward to the things that we're going to be implementing over the next little while and into the next year to make sure that those next kids, those next cohort are going to be successful as well, and our numbers are going to be even better than before. Thanks, Superintendent Coombs.
Thank you.
Superintendent Coombs, I have a question with regard to that first slide as well. I see that we have students working towards a certificate of 32. I assume that excludes the 22 that have already completed their certificate, but is this due to the work of our grad coaches? And what would be the impact of those 32 if they all graduated, say?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, if those 32 graduated, that's a couple of percentage points. That's about 1.7% that would move forward. Now, I want to be, I want to be cautious in that, we celebrate the achievement of all students, and there are students for which a diploma is not their end goal. Having said that, our grad coaches, our student success teams continue to work with all students to ensure that that they achieve to the level of their desire, and that we continue to work with families towards that end as well. And there are students who begin their career saying, you know, they're going to get a certificate. A diploma is out of reach. And what we have realized, the more we work with them, the more we recognize that that isn't necessarily the case. And so while it's important to note that those students who are working towards a certificate, they don't improve our graduation rate, but they certainly still say a lot about our care and commitment to all students who come in our doors. And I think that's really critical going forward.
Thank you. I have my next trustee is Trustee Swan, and I can assure you that I did not skip your question. I didn't see it.
Thank you, through you, Chair. My first question is to Superintendent Coombs. Can we tell how many students switched from synchronous to remote learning?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm assuming that's between quad 1 and quad 2. Is that correct, Trustee Swan?
Well, it would be for the high school students, I guess, because that's when they were supposed to. But right. I also understood that we were supposed to accommodate people, such as, yeah. And I'm alluding to lack of internet.
So we did have some students switch from remote to face-to-face. So they came from the remote school, came back. Now, I don't have that data handy. I can find that for you. For some reason, and Superintendent Rudders may know that number. I don't want to put her on the spot, though, but I thought that there were about 30 kids who migrated out from the remote school to in-person learning. I could be incorrect on that, and I certainly can find that data for you in the next day or so.
But I was more concerned about those that switched and did not attend in person and switched from synchronous to remote.
Oh, okay. I couldn't tell you that number right now, Trustee Swan, but I could certainly find that out for you.
Okay, and I'm just, I guess my secondary question, if I may, is have we reached out, and this goes along with it, to the remote learners to see why they're doing remote learning? Is it because of lack of internet? Is it because they don't have a computer? Is it because, you know, they need more support from us as a board, such as Wi-Fi, the sticks, or whatever? Have we reached out?
We have. Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes. Certainly the our remote learning staff, our TR Leger staff, and the administrators who are working do reach out to our remote learners on a regular basis. Certainly those that are learning remotely are learning online. They are connecting with a teacher on a daily basis, and so that they are having that opportunity for daily connection with a teacher. I think certainly that mode of learning, again, it was you know, that change of you know, going from in-person to remote. I think there were just you know, some that didn't adjust quickly to that, and I think certainly we have to take responsibility as an organization to ensure that we are meeting their needs. We are looking at a better success rate for quad 2. Again, I don't have hard data because, as I mentioned before, we don't have midterm report cards in the same rate, but certainly we are applying more strategies to help them be more successful for quad 2. But I don't particularly have that data with me right now.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Hearing none, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move to. Thank you very much, Superintendent Coombs, for your report. It is encouraging. I think it points out to us a number of areas where we can improve, and I'm hoping that parents and students will see this as valuable information. And so I thank you very much for your work. So we will move to 1103, which is the Upper Canada District School Board Operations and Management Priorities and Practices, Coronavirus COVID-19 update number 5. Now I'll turn this over to Director Sliwa, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Trustees, it's our pleasure as staff to bring to you our monthly operational update during the pandemic. As you know, at the start of this school year, we were doing this weekly when the board was getting its footing about how to engineer a successful start to the school year. And then we had moved from weekly to once a month, given that we wanted to make sure that we could encapsulate what was what's on the currently in front of us as our current state and what we see on the horizon. This is in addition, Mr. Chair, to the immediate bulletins that may be circulated to trustees or updates that trustees have been receiving over the last number of weeks as a way of staying in front of the significant changes that are taking place as we're trying to operate schools and deliver school programming under some very unusual and extraordinary circumstances, as everyone knows. So tonight, Mr. Chair, you're going to hear from a number of different staff. It'll be teed up with my start this evening with sharing with trustees what was initially highlighted at our November 2020 meeting, where we indicated that staff were on the process of assembling a parent survey based on the first 3.5 months of the school experience for our students from K to 12. And we also involved our parent involvement committee in the design of that slide deck. We'll go to that in just a moment, and I see that Derek is loading that up, so thank you, Derek. You're also going to hear this evening, Mr. Chair, from Superintendent Marcia McNair, who will update the board about school and field office and administrative office operations during this period of the provincial shutdown. Mr. Chair, as well, we do provide the board with a monthly update around remote learning. And where we're at is we start this new calendar year so that the board knows how we've fared since December, and as we start this new month and this new year. As well, we know the board would be interested in some of the details as it relates to the current shutdown and an effort at the direction of the Ministry of Education to provide students with intensive needs who are receiving special education support and services, how we're providing that support during the pandemic. I know, Mr. Chair, that Vice Chair McPherson through the SEAC had heard a bit of a précis about that last week, but we wanted to bring this to the full board for their notice and to see if they have any questions from staff. And then lastly, of course, knowing that we've had a full cut over to remote learning for our the majority of our students, of course, if not just about most of our students, we do continue to field questions about student devices and technology, and Superintendent Hobbs will offer a brief overview. So, Mr. Chair, my pleasure to walk through our fall parent survey. So I'll ask if Derek could advance to the next slide. And the brief overview is that we had administered this over a 10-day period and received 5,170 responses from parents during the survey being open. This is, as you note, Mr. Chair, in your landing page report, an increase from our last survey of parents in May 2020, where we had about 3,600 parents respond. So what we're seeing here is that parents are eager to share their thoughts and experiences about what they see at home in terms of how their children are engaging and learning during these extraordinary times. And the feedback also indicates, as you see on the slide, that overall we are receiving very positive feedback, Mr. Chair, about how families regard in-person learning and the synchronous model that we have been providing in our schools since September to December, prior to the current shutdown. Some comments again with the majority also commenting about the asynchronous digital in a favorable way, and same thing about asynchronous non-digital, again in general a favorable how the majority of respondents regarded our efforts to provide that support. So why don't we move to the next slide, and we can unpack that as well. So, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned earlier, we had 5,170 parents who responded. The pie chart that you see gives a clarification of what was the affiliation of the parents who responded. The orange section, the largest section, 68% of our respondents, Mr. Chair, had children in elementary school, and in the light blue section, 30% of our respondents had children in our secondary school program. 2% did not comment. What we did want to highlight, however, is that this survey in this instance had a larger catchment of parents responding from a wider variety of learning experiences. So in this case, we had parents who had children in our TR Leger system comment, as well as in our secondary virtual school. So that would be two other operational commitments that we had not captured parent input from our previous survey, and so we do believe we have a broader scope to offer you as an update this evening. So Derek, why don't we go to our next slide, please? And so in this case, we had asked the question about do you agree that your child has support from their school and teacher to be successful in their work? And this is if your child was attending an in-person learning experience, so at their local school, or the synchronous model that, as you know, Mr. Chair, in Upper Canada, we've made a very valiant effort to tie this to the local school, the local teacher, so that we have students who have an affiliation not to a virtual school necessarily in our elementary programs, but to their local school. And so in this case, you'll see that the light red or orange, depending on how it's showing up in your screen, is our elementary respondents. Our green shading is our secondary respondents. And again, 79% of our K-12 families either agreed or strongly agreed that their child was receiving what they required. 13% did not believe that they had noticed a difference in the support compared to what was their previous experience when in school, and so we understand that to be prior to the pandemic. 8% of the respondents, Mr. Chair, you'll see, believe that we need to go a little bit deeper, search and look a little bit more carefully about how we can support students while at school, or who are doing synchronous learning while at school. But I really want to highlight that almost 8 out of 10 respondents had felt that they either agreed or strongly agreed that their children were being supported by their school or teacher as they were addressing their learning during this extraordinary time. Next slide, please, Derek. In addition to the in-person and synchronous, we also asked another question, which is to look at the satisfaction with support in asynchronous digital model. Now, just wait to see if Derek can advance the slide so that folks can keep up with that. That's perfect. And again, Mr. Chair, the majority of the respondents, in this case, 63% of the families that are doing asynchronous digital, which, as you know, is really independent study online. 63% either agreed or strongly agreed that their children were getting what they needed to be successful in this experience. 7% of the families indicated that they hadn't witnessed a noticeable difference in their child's support through their program of choice, in this case, asynchronous digital. However, 30% were not agreeing that they had the support, or strongly disagree that the child had the support that they needed to be successful. And so at the tail end of our slide, we were able to tease out from the survey, Mr. Chair, findings that and recommendations that staff will be acting on and reviewing, and then acting upon based on some of the feedback from this survey experience. So lastly, Mr. Chair, we have a satisfaction with support, which is asynchronous non-digital model, and that is the third snapshot that we're offering this evening. And again, Mr. Chair, just for the confirmation of where we're at with this, the asynchronous non-digital means that students are not using a learning platform. Instead, what they're doing is that their learning is driven by hard copy materials, either booklets or assignments that have been assembled by the school and delivered to the students for their work and then returned for assessment. So I'm going to ask again, Derek, if you wouldn't mind advancing this slide. And so there we are. Thank you. And in this case, Mr. Chair, again, the majority of the respondents had indicated that 67% felt that they either agreed or strongly agreed that in this model, again, that they felt that their children were getting what they needed to be successful. An additional 7% had indicated that they didn't notice any difference in their support of their child through this mode compared to what their child and family were accustomed to in the past. Again, we do have some work with about a third of the families, nearly a third of the families indicating that we do need to do more work in this area, with some families, this third, disagreeing or disagreeing strongly that their child required more to improve in their learning. So let's go to the next slide, Derek, if you wouldn't mind, which is engagement is critical, whether we are learning during a pandemic or, in fact, Mr. Chair, if we are learning in a more conventional time. So this survey sought to understand the child's level of interest in school and in school activities based on the fact that we are in a very different time and how that compares to previous years. So the majority had responded, 43%, that there was an indicator that they felt that their child was enjoying their school experience. 31% said that they were interested or excited most of the time. So at this point, Mr. Chair, in this count, 74% were either fully enjoying or most of the time enjoying their experience. But we have this quarter of families that we need to take a closer look at. 20% were indicating that only sometimes their child was interested or excited. 5% said we had children who were not interested, and 1% indicated that they were unsure how to characterize their child's level of interest this year. We have a few slides left, Mr. Chair, so I'm going to ask Derek if we can advance to the next slide, please. And this connects to the connection to why students might be feeling a change in attitude in terms of being more interested or engaged in school. I'll ask Derek to advance that to the next slide, please. Thank you, Derek. So 45% of the respondents had indicated, as you know, Mr. Chair, that their child's feelings for school was different than other years, and we asked why. And some of the examples, and not always, Mr. Chair, did parents choose to provide a response, but if we were to indicate the most frequent responses, number one, and this doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, that knowing that there was a school shutdown from March 2020 until August 2020, it's no surprise that students enjoyed returning to what is part of a regular conventional childhood, which is attending school and learning with peers. And so that was a very frequent response. Another one was the presence of caring staff and teachers. No surprise. Again, we know that our staff are pulling out all the stops, and we're very excited and committed to welcoming students back to school with this new school year. There was a sense by some families that they felt their child was more focused, coming off of this very large gap where they were learning remotely for that 5-month period. Others had commented that in our effort to restructure the learning experience, and some are learning, as you know, Mr. Chair, remotely when we started our school experience, while the majority were 80% were learning back in the regular school experience. There was a feeling that students were having a greater capacity to work at their own pace, and this was particularly noted in the families that had asynchronous learners in their household. And then lastly, for all remote learners, the feedback that we received is that parents were enjoying the pace that was available and the less distractions that may have enhanced the change in attitude and the view that school is more enjoyable. On the other side, Mr. Chair, and we'll ask Derek if you wouldn't mind advancing to this next slide, and we only have one more slide left after this, Mr. Chair. The reasons why there was a change in attitude that was less favorable to enjoying school. Number one came up was that operating schools during a pandemic meant that there was greater restrictions and greater attention to detail and process, and for some students that wasn't as favorable a return to school, because there was a greater awareness and a greater, I think, regimentation about how to manage the school day for the purposes of safety and the care of everybody in the building. Some had commented about an increased level of stress due to the pandemic and how to balance their learning experience. I don't know that we know enough about that, and we may have to ask some subsequent questions about that to get closer. There was also, because of the remote learners who made that choice to learn at a distance from their local school at their home, there was a feeling of feeling disconnected from the class, teacher, or school community. There were some who had a change in attitude as well because of issues they had experienced about accessing resources and feedback, and what we would understand as some frustrations that might come with that. And for some others, it was the difficulty for some remote learners to feel engaged and motivated. I mean, this is again from parents asking their children about if they were not as interested or engaged in their learning during the last quarter of last year, what reasons might be attributed to that. So lastly, Mr. Chair, a key part of our focus is obviously focusing on improvement and how we can continue to ensure that learning, whether on premises or remotely, is the best possible experience we can offer students. So I'll ask Derek to go to the last slide, and we have about just a little more than a half dozen recommendations that we're looking at, and this will come from it has come from the survey, which will become a focal point, Mr. Chair, for some of our activity as we work as staff. As you might imagine, some of these things relates to the perception or experience of connecting with people or resources that will further the learning. There is also about trying to develop that sense of excitement and connection through other experiences, so virtual spirit days and virtual field trips. We had heard that from our student senate not so long ago, Mr. Chair. So those comments from the survey is sort of aligning with what we're hearing from our senior students themselves. There's an interest in understanding how we can improve interaction between in-person learning and synchronous learners. So what can be the pedagogical approaches that might make sense in the classroom learning experience? We can always improve in communications, and that was a suggestion from the percentage of families who were disagreeing or unsatisfied at this juncture about their child's experience. There's an interest in what does it mean to get children more outdoors as part of their learning when we return to school. Thinking about how can we further support students for their well-being. And then lastly, giving an eye to when there is a nod for schools to return to a more conventional state of operation, how can we flag about getting back to the extracurriculars that all of our students really do enjoy and desire? As a matter of fact, is often a highlight for many of our students, apart from their favorite teacher or for our secondary school students' favorite courses. So we would want to make sure that we brought this to the board. We hope that between reading the landing page report and this brief walkthrough will be helpful for the Board of Trustees. And this very last slide, of course, is really about what we see and understand and what will be our next steps as a staff. We'll be continuing to assess the feedback, bring it to a point of seeing what we can do to improve or increase in areas where people are desiring that focus. And of course, the student well-being focus is, as you know, Mr. Chair, front and center. You'll recall Superintendent Perry's presentation about the student well-being plan, which is well connected to the realities about teaching, learning, and supporting young people and children at this time during the pandemic. So we have a way and a means for moving forward with that focus as well. So, Mr. Chair, that is the first quarter of our report. I'm wondering if it would please the board for us to continue to hear from the other superintendents and then open ourselves up for questions. I'll look for your lead on how you'd like to continue.
Thank you, Director. That was a very comprehensive introduction. There is a lot going on there, and I'm seeking the direction of the board. Are there any questions now on that portion of the report, or do you want to wait until the end?
I personally would like, I don't have a question on this portion, but I'd like to see it in the sections so then we know, because it's such a large report, what to ask, and we don't lose it with and end up with 3-5 questions on different topics. Thank you. That's just my 10 cents worth.
Good point. Are there any questions now on this portion of the report then?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Yes, it's obvious that there's an awful lot of innovation going on in our schools and virtually now that we're not in school. Are we developing some sort of I guess I would call it an idea bank, that maybe what's working in one school, is there a process for sharing those success stories with other schools? I was out for a drive today, and some of my schools seem to be doing awfully well. And I just wondered, is there a process for sharing these success stories? Maybe it's internal. I'm not familiar with that.
Mr. Chair, through you, I'm just going to confirm. So I'm collecting the questions at this point, and then we'll be doing a wraparound after the full presentation. Is that correct?
No, I thought we were going to answer them as they came up.
Sure. So, Mr. Chair, through you, I think, first of all, thank you to the Vice Chair for recognizing that we are immersed in probably one of our most creative and innovative times as a school sector because of necessity, and it is actually templating a lot of our practices. Superintendent Rudders might want to comment, if she wouldn't mind for a moment, just on the notion of the trajectory of how remote learning is creating a difference in our approaches from where we were, for example, in late September to where we are now, and maybe just as a good example about the difference on what was our focus in our training and work through the distance learning department and what we're doing now. And if I could just kind of tee this up a bit better, it seems to me that if I look at the different kinds of invitations for staff development since the beginning of September, it really seemed to focus on the mechanical use of our teams and D2L desire to learn management systems. But now we're going to the way about how it can be engaged to enhance learning versus enhancing the activity on the screen. And I'll just turn it over to the superintendent to see if she has any comments that way.
Thank you, Director Sliwa, and through you, Chair. I think that, the director is pointing out a really important kind of evolution of the skills and interests of our staff across the course of this year. The rate of change, the rate of implementation of new practice has been really astounding. And so we're seeing increasing numbers of educators coming online to participate in training that is in the moment and of interest to them in terms of where they are in their practice. And very much true is that in September, we saw a great deal of interest in, how do I upload documents to my team site or to D2L? How do I send emails or potentially through D2L? So very functional based practice. And over the course recently, of course, since we've come back in January, with the increase in remote learning as a result of the closure, we are still seeing some of those kind of questions resurface, but increasingly, particularly since the beginning of January, the most popular topic that people were reaching out to the distance learning team on starting last week was how to create breakout rooms in Teams meetings to facilitate group work and small group instruction. And also we saw an increase in our educational assistants coming in for training opportunities and pose questions during the drop-in sessions so that they would be able to participate within those team settings and those classroom settings in support of learners. So it's very accurate to indicate that the sophistication with which our staff are using tools and engaging remote learning practices, from a pedagogical perspective has really, increased dramatically throughout the course of the year, and it continues to do so as we're seeing through this current period of required and full remote learning. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions at this part? Hearing none, Director, would you and your team like to continue, please?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. The next portion of tonight's update comes from Superintendent McNair, who will comment about operations of schools and the administrative office sites run by the board. Just before Superintendent McNair does get online, I just wanted to also flag for trustees that you'll see in tonight's report that's posted that the the bookend piece to the parent survey that was conducted at the end of November and early December will be a student survey that we'll be doing for students in grades 7 to 12 again, just like Mr. Chair we did in the beginning of June 2020. And we'll be working with our two student trustees, Trustee Hughes and Trustee Jordan, to ensure, Trustee Evans, I should say, to make sure that we have the insights of our student senate to round out the survey. And as you'll see in the report, we're looking at a February 22nd February 2021 delivery for that particular survey to get out and in circulation. So with that noted, Mr. Chair, over to Superintendent McNair for the operation of schools and school office sites update.
Thank you, Director Sliwa. Through you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Thank you. We can.
Great. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to provide a verbal update this evening on school operations. So, as you know, the Ministry of Education indicated on December 21st that students would be engaging in remote learning only, commencing on January 4th. So that means that our schools have been closed with the expectation that staff would work from home as much as possible. However, our schools are deemed as workplaces for staff if access is needed in order to support the delivery of their teaching modes to the students. So we do have some staff that have connected via their principal and through the superintendent for approval so that they can come to the school and complete their teaching responsibilities and supporting the learning of the students at home. We also have, through the Ministry of Education announcement, the ability to have special education students returning to in-person learning in our schools if they cannot be accommodated remotely. And I know my colleague, Superintendent Perry, will speak a bit further about that in a few minutes. So we certainly do have some students and some staff that have returned into the workplace in order to provide these learning opportunities. Our school administration are on site each day at our schools to ensure that any and all of the public health measures are adhered to for all staff and students that do enter the school site at this time. In terms of our board office and our field office site, so under Ontario Regulation 8220 that directed us to a shutdown for the province, schools and most businesses are closed, and there are specific exemptions to that regulation. However, school board offices are not currently exempted from closure, so our staff are continuing to work from home during this shutdown. So the central board office in Brockville and all of our 3 field sites are closed until January 25th. And we know that we successfully can work remotely, as we can recall to the spring that we were able to manage all of our core business functions from being off-site in a remote manner. So we continue to do so and support all the operations of the board in that manner. So at this point, it's a brief verbal update from me on school operations. As you know, we await some further direction from the ministry and the province in regards to whether or not our students will return to in-person learning as of January 25th.
I have a question, please. Trustee Swan.
Go ahead, Trustee Swan.
Yes, I'm just wondering, what have we done to, especially with the new order that's effective, I think, tomorrow, the state of emergency order, that if you can work from home, what are we doing to support our staff in this? I mean, are we having principals and vice principals in the schools, our high schools, with 3 or 4 office administrators? Have we done anything to negate having or to have as few staff as possible in these locations? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, through you, I'll ask Superintendent Ferguson to comment, as it's an HR question, and it is a good question, and we would want to clarify with the board how we're approaching that.
Thank you. Just want to confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So what I can share with folks tonight is that this, as Trustee Swan has indicated, with these new recommendations coming out, as the senior team, we've been meeting to discuss this, and there will be communication going out to our schools later this evening that outlines some of the steps that we'll be taking to do exactly what the trustee has suggested. And it is certainly our goal to keep as many folks at home as possible to help reduce the spread. And we also will be ensuring that the operational needs of the school will be met. The Ministry of Education and the Upper Canada School Board are still committed to serving students with special education needs and to ensuring that staff members who have connectivity issues have a place where they can access the buildings and be able to hook up to our Wi-Fi and be able to run their synchronous classes. So that will still be in place. So there still is a need to have some folks report to work. This is a requirement from the Government of Ontario at this point and the Ministry of Education, and we will be fulfilling that and ensuring students still have that ability. But as the trustee suggested, we also reviewed today ways that we can draw down and keep that number to the very bare minimum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Ferguson. Are there any questions at this point? Hearing none. Director, would you like to continue, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Part 3 of the report, of this 4-part report, relates to a remote learning update, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to ask Superintendent Rudders if she would kindly update the board on where we're at, knowing that we've had a full cutover to remote learning as of January 4th and until January 25th. And so the magnitude of how we are providing program now has switched from our 80-20 split to just about 100%, or nearly 100%, to remote learning. So I know that trustees would have some questions and some certainly some curiosity about current state. So I'll turn it over to Superintendent Rudders, and then following that, Superintendent Perry will give an update about the students who have special education needs, including students with who require intensive support and how we're supporting their learning. So first of all to Superintendent Rudders and then to Superintendent Perry.
Thank you, Director Siwa, and through you, Chair. It's certainly my pleasure to provide the board with an update on our current state with regards to remote learning. Just prior to doing so, I just want to revisit the question that I responded to a short time ago around the change in, I guess, sophistication and the focus on pedagogy that we're seeing emerge among our training and our contact with teachers in remote learning. And one area that has grown significantly over the last several months has been an area led by our teaching and learning department, and they're reaching out remotely and actually participating within classrooms across the system in a structure or an opportunity they're calling In Your Class With Your Class, and they are collaborating with teachers across the system on mathematics instruction and some of the, I guess, research-based strategies that are proven in terms of mathematics instruction, and actually joining classes and co-teaching within classes across the board on a regular basis. And so that's just another indication of how our staff and our teaching staff are moving beyond the mechanics of offering synchronous remote learning opportunities with their classes and with their in-person students participating to a much more, as I said before, sophisticated and pedagogically focused approach to learning. So moving forward, as you're aware, and we've mentioned tonight, we received direction over the holidays to engage in full remote learning effective January 4th. And subsequently, we now are in a position where all of our students will continue with remote learning until January 25th, and that's our most current direction. To be clear, under this current period, we continue to be responsible for a delivery of program under the parameters that were outlined in PPM 164, which talks specifically to the requirements for synchronous learning in a particular number of minutes per grade, and also about our obligation to ensure that families have an opportunity to access, as necessary and upon request, asynchronous remote learning options. And so within that, however, there was a recognition most recently from the ministry in this directive that our educators may exercise to some extent their professional judgment when determining those in instructional practice, given that prescribed minutes may be more difficult for some families at this point in time, given the impact of the closures, the work from home orders, and essentially the pandemic. And as a board, we engaged planning for that full return, or that return to full remote learning on January 4th, essentially in 3 stages. We had activity and action that we engaged prior to our return to school on January 4th. On January 4th, there were some very specific steps that we took. And of course, we've continued to engage some specific activities since January 4th. On December 30th, so prior to the holidays, we were able to engage a voluntary operational update with our principals and our vice principals so that they were able to be fully informed and plan effectively for the return of our staff to school and to teaching on January 4th. In addition, in advance of January 4th, our communications department, ensured that they were able to advise parents and students about the ministry direction and to let them know that they could expect more detailed communication directly from their school and their classroom teacher on January 4th. Our special education department has been very active in planning and implementing new measures, and Superintendent Perry is certainly going to speak to that shortly. But they were working before January 4th to engage planning for in-person learning opportunities for our students with profound special education needs. And our IT department initiated yet another process and communication strategy to determine technology needs of our in-person learners now that we are in a period or coming into a period of full remote learning. On January 4th, our schools engaged several key activities to get started effectively. And so that involved a stand-up staff meeting, or an online actually staff meeting, a digital or virtual staff meeting with teachers. First thing on the 4th, teachers were provided with some individual and some collaborative time to plan and prepare for remote student learning that morning. And in addition, each teacher communicated with every student in their class for a welcome back connection and to determine how each child would access learning beginning on Tuesday, January 5th. We also saw at the secondary level, because we knew the period of closure would be extending for secondary students until January 25th, our secondary teachers began the process of preparing the non-digital learning packages for those in-person learners who were unable to access through a digital platform. And those students were able to pick up learning packages for a 2-week period as of January 7th. In addition, as I mentioned a bit earlier, our distance learning support team and our teaching and learning staff were working together from January 4th onwards to provide virtual drop-in sessions for educators to access that in-the-moment support and guidance that they needed to have related to remote learning platforms and functions, but also related to the pedagogy that we've spoken about here tonight. And so these daily sessions that run practically the entire workday have continued ever since January 4th and are being well utilized by our staff across the system, and also are being utilized by our occasional staff as well. And then since January 4th, of course, our teachers have continued to provide that daily synchronous online instruction and, doing their very best to meet the requirements for synchronous minutes per day as outlined in the PPM. We also, when we received information that the period of closure for elementary students would be extended beyond 1 week, we created and distributed 2-week packages for non-digital learning materials to those students who required those. And of course, our teachers at the elementary level continue to have the choice to access centrally developed learning materials for this purpose, or to use their own materials that they've created, or a combination of both. Our teachers continue to monitor student learning and engagement, and are, doing their best to connect regularly with students who are learning asynchronously and therefore not participating in the daily synchronous sessions that are available. So I think it's important to note that by most accounts, and so my colleagues and I as superintendents are regularly communicating with our principals and checking in on how the implementation process is going, and overall, our sense and the feedback has is that it's been quite a smooth process to pivot our schools to this full remote learning. And I really do believe that that can be attributed to the advanced preparations that our teachers have engaged throughout the fall to ensure that they were ready for this eventuality. And of course, to the leadership and the support of our very effective and attentive school administrators. And so they invested the time throughout the fall as school-based staff to ensure the readiness, and we're feeling that transition has been positive and smooth to this point in time. So that concludes my update, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Trustees, do you have any questions? Is that Trustee McRae?
No, it's not, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. I do have a question for you, Superintendent Rudders. I'm wondering if you have had any concerns with regard to the appropriateness, not so much of the materials, but for the instructions, particularly as they apply to, say, the lower grades, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, in the asynchronous, non-digital packages. Have you had any experience with that yet?
So through you, Chair, I have not had any concerns come to me directly. I did notice that as some of the feedback in the parent survey, and actually I'm familiar with the asynchronous materials that we're creating centrally, and have gone back in and actually had a discussion with the team who is responsible, the leadership team responsible for that work, and we do provide a fair bit of instruction and examples for parents in the centrally developed resources. So it's interesting to me. I think it's something we may want to share with our principals and vice principals. Part of our action items that the director cited on that last slide when he presented the data from the survey talked about, I think it was 8 or 10 action items that we were taking away. One of those would be, I think, a fulsome conversation with our principals and vice principals about how we can just help our teachers to understand that that has come back as feedback, so that we can do some self-monitoring around how we might make that those materials more easily accessible for our families.
Well, that's one point, but if I could follow up on my question, it concerns primarily the level of language in some of the instructional materials, especially at the lower levels.
So
I'm wondering, all I'm asking you to do is to investigate that, please.
I certainly can. Through you, Chair, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. Trustee McPherson, you have a question?
Yes, I do. We've been talking about student support. What support do we offer the parents Some of the comments I'm getting from my parents is the packages are great, but I'm not sure what to do with them. Or somebody else will say, it's awfully hard to get my child to sit down and work at this for 2 or 3 hours a day. So are we offering some kind of a support system to these parents that all of a sudden, especially with the non-synchronous or the asynchronous, are finding themselves in the role or thrust into the role of being instructors to their children? Is there any support out there for those parents?
So through you, Chair, I'd be happy to answer that question. It certainly is, I think, a valid concern that we do have parents who, this is a very asynchronous learning is a very independent study type approach. So we provide materials and parents really are the key contact and support for their children at home. And that is a challenging role for them to be assuming in the absence of, teaching qualifications. We do have as part of the protocol that we put out for schools, we have invited parents to be able to contact by email or by phone the teacher at any point that they would like to. We also have teachers who make a point of checking in with families who are learning asynchronously, and we've said that, on a periodic basis. My understanding from most of my schools is that's happening at minimum once every 2 weeks, but often more frequently, particularly if there seems to be an acceptance and interest in that level of communication. So that is happening. We also are providing opportunities for parents to access support through the distance learning team. And so they have emailed us or called our number, and then one of our team members calls them back to provide that kind of, to answer their questions or provide some guidance. That guidance is often related to the technical tools and using whatever the particular platform might be.
Thank you.
Any further questions on this segment?
Please, did I ask the question?
Go ahead, Trustee Barry.
How, through the chair, is there any way to gauge how much the distance learning team is being used? How much of their material is actually being used? I'll mute now.
Through you, Chair. We certainly are able to track through our the team site where we host all of our support sessions and where all of our learning resources and materials are stored or made available to the system. The frequency of use and the access of particular items or participation. So, for example, in the past 10 days, I just received some data today, so it's timely. In the past 10 days, 1,500 educators have actively used the team site where our distance learning resources are housed, and we have a little over 1,800 total members, which would be staff members. We have seen a 54% increase in the people who are accessing that site and the training sessions in the last 30 days. And Monday, January 4th was the busiest single day with 1,600 visits to the site. We have similar data related to who and how many people are using the asynchronous learning materials that we're developing centrally. And I don't have those readily available at my fingertips, but they certainly are available. So we are able to monitor how and when and how frequently and how many people are engaging in some of the supports that we're providing.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions so far? I think Trustee Barry has raised a very good question, though, with regard to how much of the remote asynchronous non-digital material is being used and, and completed. And I guess that would be gauged by the students' submissions and evaluations. Am I correct, Superintendent Rudders?
Yes, through you, Chair, you are correct. And that data, that specific data about how much is being returned to teachers for assessment and evaluation is not something that we have drilled down, because it would require an individual teacher survey across the system to get that level of granular data. But we have done some work polling our school principals and have some feedback and some statistics around what they're finding about the materials, what their impressions are about the return rates, the scope of the packages in terms of the volume of materials that go home on a bi-weekly basis. And so, if there's a desire on the part of the board to engage some of that information, we certainly would be happy to come back at a future date and share with particular focus on that topic.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Rudders. May I suggest that the next operational report might contain some information with regard to this?
Through you, Chair, absolutely. I'd be happy to bring that back.
Thank you. Director, I believe you have Superintendent Perry on tap. You want to introduce the section?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. We'll hear from Superintendent Perry next, just on an update about remote learning and serving students with special education needs.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll just check to make sure that you can hear me.
Loud and clear, thank you.
Thank you. So my segment of the update will speak to how we are implementing the direction of the Ministry of Education to have in-person learning for some of our students with special education needs. We in Upper Canada are using a phased-in approach that really honors the basic tenets of the provincial direction, mainly being that most of our students will be learning remotely in order to limit the transmission or the spread of COVID by having limited numbers of people coming into our schools, and that also refers to minimizing the number of staff in schools as well. We are aware that there are some students that cannot be accommodated remotely, and that is the focus of our phase one, the students who we are not able to appropriately accommodate for in the remote learning environment. And we developed criteria to address the first phase. So in our first phase, the criteria essentially focused on students that were assigned to system designated classes. That included the 4 Power Up 2 classes that are currently in operation, and then we have 3 additional system designated classes in 3 additional schools. Beyond that, we also identified students who, according to their IPRC or IEP, are following completely alternative programming for 100% of their day. Now, in those 2 categories, if the students could be accommodated remotely, they were not offered in-person learning, because the intent of the direction from the province was that if students can be accommodated remotely, they are to continue learning remotely. Also included within the first phase, obviously, are ECPP or Section 23 sites. Those programs are run by our mental health partners, but we do provide staffing for the programming. And those students are 100% alternatively programmed for through the mental health program. We included within phase 1 as well students who are registered as in-person learners prior to the holiday closure period. And as a result, we ended up, as of January 7th, with 44 students with special education needs returning to in-person learning. 18 schools initially received students for that in-person learning, with 24 teachers and 48.5 educational assistants welcoming our students back to school. 7 of our 8 ECPP mental health partners were able to open the sites for learning for 12 students. And in those programs, there were 5 UCDSB teachers and 6 educational assistants to support the in-person learning. As we take a look at moving forward for a second phase, we're taking a look at criteria for students who absolutely cannot be accommodated for in the remote learning environment. And we will be communicating that with our principals in the near future as we take a look at the implications for bringing further students into the school. When we take a look at the learning for all of our students with special education needs, regardless of where they're learning from, we have three, I call them the 3 C's. The first one is connect. So our school teams are engaging in that regular connection and communication with families and students. Schools are monitoring engagement despite the learning mode that the student is currently in, whether it's in person or whether it is in the remote learning environment, to reduce any barriers that might be there for participation. Collaboration is the second C, and school teams are working very much in partnership to ensure that accommodations, modifications, and alternative learning for that remote learning environment is that those accommodations, modifications, and alternative learning are being put into place for the students to ensure that they're able to access their learning. The school teams also are collaborating with parents to make sure that there are continual updates, that they're identifying any challenges that are present, and also engaging in problem solving. And the school teams are also connecting with our system level supports, including preparing of alternative menus and providing resources to school-based teams in a site for special education staff. So ultimately our system-based staff are supporting schools with alternative learning menus and also providing resources and information for special education staff throughout the system. Communication is the last C. So our classroom teachers, our special education teachers, and our education support staff communicate regularly with families. The schools as well are providing communication to families, including dispersing the special education and mental health and wellness newsletters that our special education department is preparing on a monthly basis. And our system staff is also communicating regularly with the school-based teams. And ultimately, what we've seen in this first phase of implementation, that our very dedicated staff throughout the system worked very hard to reduce those barriers to learning for all of our students with special education needs. And the people who are on site work very hard to welcome students back in a time that certainly is anxiety-inducing for all of us, but particularly for the parents of students who have the most significant of needs. So students have returned to learning, and our staff is supporting all of our students with special education needs.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chair, John McCray.
Yes, go ahead, Trustee McCray.
Thank you. This is a question that comes from earlier in the presentation. And when the survey of parents, one of the statistics was that 31% of respondents said their child is interested / excited about school most of the time. Now, this is not to suggest that this is a difficult time. This is to get young people excited is difficult when it's hard to get some grown-ups excited. However, I wonder if it would be helpful and edifying, and I say this to the student trustees and to the trustee mentors to those student trustees, that perhaps it might be helpful or edifying in the least to have a question, an open-ended question on what it would take in this pandemic time for students to be interested / excited about school these days. Thank you.
I suspect that question exceeds the boundaries of this particular aspect of the report, but it's a good question. Good question. Does anyone want to answer it? Hearing none. Director, are there any further presentations on this operational report?
Mr. Chair, yes, thank you for the patience of the board. We have one last comment or update, and that is from our Executive Superintendent of Business, Mr. Hobbs, who will be commenting about our efforts to distribute student devices, our computers, during this increased intensity to and cut over to remote learning. So I'll ask Superintendent Hobbs to comment.
Thank you, Director Sliwa, and thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to bring forward a brief update on the status of technology distribution for students who are not learning in a school setting. As you know, this has been a challenge and a concern for our parents and communities going back to last April-May timeframe. So just a little bit of history. Back in the April-May timeframe of 2020, when we started ramping up learning from home, there was an initial distribution of technology, and at that time we put out approximately 1,500 loaner laptops for grade 7 to 12 students, in addition to another 1,100 laptops of special SIA equipment for students who had designated special education assistive technology. Again, thinking that schools were sort of going back to a more normal posture in the fall, we did collect back a number of those, clean them off for both software and hardware, and from a hygiene standpoint, and got them ready. Some of those were put back into the schools that needed them to support the students who were learning in our buildings. But we went through over the course of the September to December timeframe, we actually loaned out a whole bunch more in response, because sometimes the kids who were necessarily the same as the ones who were learning from home or needed devices in the spring. So at that time, we put out about another 1,400 or so laptops and about 30 internet hotspots for students who had were enrolled in synchronous and asynchronous digital learning modes. Once over the Christmas holidays, we heard that there was going to be a further lockdown. We actually stood up a survey to once again ask parents for an initial reaction as to who thought they would need technology. We were really at that time recognizing that the initial lockdown was for a week only for elementary students, and most of the month of January for secondary. Our focus at the time was predominantly on secondary students, owing to the need to support them for completing credits, particularly at the grade 12 level. And also just recognizing that the cycle of collecting the information from parents, preparing devices, rolling them out, and then potentially collecting them back wouldn't be feasible for learners they were only going to be out for a week. So since that time, we've collected data from parents in an initial wave. We've put out about 350 additional loaner laptops and a further 20 internet hotspots, predominantly for grade 12 and 11 students enrolled in in-person learning. So as of about Wednesday, or as of today, actually, we have about 2,000 UCDSB laptops that are out assigned to students for at-home use, not including SIA laptops, which represents about another 1,000, so a total of about 1,000. We also, through this year, have actually, through our regular approved budget, acquired another 1,000 laptops, brand new, and those are, as we speak, being prepped for at-home use should we want to conduct a second wave of technology distribution over the course of the next couple weeks and beyond. So one of the things, consuming a logistically challenging exercise to find out where they're needed, get them out, and then potentially collect them back later on. But we have another 1,000 to add on to the 3,000 that are already out there, and forming a strategy for further dipping into further inventories and distributing out more should we be needed to do that. So we feel that based on the data we've collected over the course of the last 4 months, particularly since September, about needs for parents, we feel that between what we've got out there and what we've got remaining that we could draw upon, we feel we could meet the need for lower grades should the decision be made that we're going to be out longer and therefore need more devices out there. And so the bottom line, I think, for my staff really is that even though we are obviously in a bit of a reactive stance here as circumstances change and the government does its best to continually reevaluate and respond to the changing conditions in our various, from an IT standpoint, is look out for the next 6 months and start forecasting what the needs would be should we be in a variety of scenarios, and make sure that we have the resources on hand to deploy out. So that will include, again, dipping into our existing infrastructure as needed to provide greater devices for people who are learning from home, or actually acquiring additional devices should the need arise. And both of those, I think we have good strategies for doing that. And the same is also true for our mobile internet hotspots. we've been quite satisfied with how those have performed, and are looking at acquiring more of those so that we can meet any kind of eventual need for our students who are trying to learn digitally from home. And so the bottom line is the needs. We feel like we have a very big footprint out in schools to support, or out among students who are learning remotely. Lots of devices out there, almost 3,000, another 350 going out, another 1,000 brand new laptops that are being prepared to go out should they need to be, and a strategy for providing even more should the need arise. And that is it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Hobbs. I have a question for you, though. Is there any student or family who has requested a device that has not received it yet?
I would say yes, Mr. Chair. There are some, as I indicated, the elementary grades who have signaled that they, either in this round or in previous rounds, who have signaled to some extent that they may require one or may eventually need one. Particularly this round, there we have some, I think, kids in earlier grades. But again, the initial distribution this time around, recognizing that we were only anticipating a week-long shutdown of elementary schools, we chose to prioritize high schools because they were going to be out longer. So as the situation evolves and it becomes more apparent that there's going to be pressure on elementary, I think that's where we're going to need to actually direct the next round. And again, we're fairly confident that we can meet the demand as it's been expressed over the course of the last few months. And again, our surveys and intake methods, so we both have an online survey and we have a dial-in phone number where parents who are don't obviously have technology, they can call a phone number and request something, and we'll put that in the queue. And you know, that's continually open. So it's not like if people decide they need something, or if they decide their home computer breaks and they can't afford to replace a new one, we do have a mechanism to have a continuous intake model where they can flag those concerns, and we'll put them in the hopper for a device.
Thank you very much. I saw something flash under my screen here, and I think it's Vice Chair McPherson, you have a question?
I believe Trustee Swan was ahead of me, so I'll defer to her for a minute. Okay,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Trustee Swan.
Thank you, Vice Chair McPherson. I'm kind of used to it, but I have a question. As we have these 1,000 new computers, and for student learning, I know the priority was the high school panel first because of the 1 week shutdown anticipation. But now that we know it's more than 1 week, and personally, I don't know why it's not till February 10th, and why would you send 1 million staff back to schools when we're in a lockdown or a serious lockdown? But anyway, my question here is, and I've asked it 6 months ago to you, and you said after Christmas you'd look into it. Are any of these devices available for our EAs and ECEs that are at home supporting our students but may not have the technology or may need a hotspot because of where they live, a stick, an internet stick? Have we reached out to staff to see, because they're supporting students from home? I know some of them are in the schools supporting our students, or they're rotating through the schools. So my question is, have we reached out to these staff to support our special needs students? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the staff requirements are, I think, an ongoing discussion. So as an example, it's not the same thing to Trustee Swan's question, but last spring, you'll recall, when we shut schools down, office staff were working from home, and many of them had the same comment that they were intimately involved in the day-to-day administrative operations of the schools. And because when they're at school, they're assigned a desktop computer that they couldn't bring home, if they were to work from home, they needed technology support. And we made 140 devices available to them for home support. So we have a variety of staff in a variety of categories, EAs and ECEs among them, who are providing various levels of support. And what we've found with the EA group particularly is that not all of them have the same needs for technology. So on a case-by-case basis, what we're trying to do is assist principals who are saying, I have an EA who works with a particular student. The work is technology intensive. What can we do? Sometimes what happens is we'll ask a principal to say, pull a device out of your school inventory and allow the EA to take that home, recognizing that at some point we may need them to bring it back in for something else. But the short answer to Trustee Swan's question is we have 25,000 devices in our board-owned devices, desktop PCs, laptops, iPads, and there's ample devices there, I think, for us to meet the needs of our staff. Not all staff, not all EAs necessarily need technology to support the needs of their students, and in fact, some EAs, may not be working with technology at all in the instructional support of the student. So we'd really like to take those on a sort of one-by-one basis, which we've been doing in cooperation with the principals and strategizing on how we can get technology in those people's hands on an as-needed basis. So the short answer is, I think there's lots of technology that's available there. Thus far, what we've done is the new devices that are coming in, we've prioritized for student use, but there's certainly lots of devices in our school and board inventory to provide to staff or for staff to be able to access on an as-needed basis as time goes on, and we've been working through those on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks.
I just want to add one point here with regard to the staff members who are being called in to work in schools to serve our special needs students. In our conversation with the minister this past week, the question was raised with regard to the extension of eligibility for targeted emergency daycare services for frontline workers, including our own staff. And at that meeting, it was under consideration, and the next day, the minister announced that that extension was granted to include teachers and EAs who were called in to deal with students with special needs. So I just wanted to add that as an addendum. Are there any further questions on this issue?
Yes, I've got one.
Bill? Yes, sorry.
Yes, this is more of a technical question. I think you've done a pretty good job at accessing technology, but I have a question about internet access. Out in the western edges of the board, and I'm sure other places, internet can be pretty spotty. Might have great service, and my neighbor down the road 3 miles does not, even though they've got similar providers. We talk about these hot sticks, and I'll admit to being a newbie on this, but can you explain to me how a hot stick works and how far it goes to actually alleviate the issue of poor internet connectivity? Through the chair.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. So the actual brand name of the technology we've been acquiring is called a Khajiit hotspot. And the essential connectivity is that you have for many of us who live in more urban settings, shall we say, such as they are in Eastern Ontario, many of us will have what we call terrestrial internet. So that typically would come Bell DSL or a Cogeco cable, basically through a landline that comes into your home. That's one way of getting the internet or a data feed into your home. Some of the other ways that we've seen across our jurisdiction over the past 20 years would include wireless, so point-to-point wireless, where you may have an antenna on your home or on an old TV tower that you might have had that points to another tower directly through line of sight, and you can get wireless service that way, which is not the same as Wi-Fi. And there's also been cases where there's been satellite, believe it or not. So this isn't the Elon Musk Starlink satellite. This is an older kind of generation, which came with its own challenges. And of course, we all now carry smartphones, and we have data access over the cellular connection on our smartphones. So that's how you get your Facebook or your Twitter or your email using that LTE, oftentimes 4G or 5G to some extent cellular connection. And that's what these Khajiit smart spots are using. So essentially, imagine that you have kind of a combination of a Wi-Fi router with almost like a cell phone, a cellular connection, and you're actually connecting to a cellular network. But instead of, you know, having a phone interface, basically you're having a wireless router, and instead of a cable plugging into that router, it's just a wireless cellular connection that's going to the next tower. So, you know, that's really what you're talking about when you're talking about the smart sticks or the hotspots or the rocket hubs or those kinds of things. It's basically a Wi-Fi router that people would connect to normally in their house, but instead of a cable plugging into the back of it, you would have a wireless cellular connection. And of course, you know, the challenge, I think, as many of you know, I spent a number of years teaching and working in IT in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. And when you're working in a highly urban area concentrated, you often you know, become accustomed to having the highest speed terrestrial connections available everywhere. And owing to the nature of our geography, both the size and you know, just the rural nature of it, oftentimes what you're seeing here is there's no one fix that's going to provide internet access in all areas. So it tends to be a bit of a patchwork. And much as we've built our own board's wide area network, as maybe you may be aware, we have one of the largest privately owned fiber networks in Eastern Ontario that we've built for ourselves over 20 years. In addition to our Bell WAN, you kind of have to piece internet together. So you'll find that the cellular connection is going to solve the data problem where people would otherwise have a good cellular connection. So if your phone, you don't have a good cellular data connection at your house, the hotspot, Khajiit hotspot's not going to work. So I've asked, actually, one of the things we're doing over the course of the next 6 months is sort of putting together a bit of a menu of potential solutions that we could potentially offer both staff and students for how they could get internet to their house. And to be completely candid with you, there may be some places where it just doesn't exist at this particular time to get quality internet. And that's where I think what you're starting to see is providing the option of opening schools in a limited way to allow people to come and use the reliable internet we have there, because we're almost all the way through our broadband modernization initiative, which has been underway all along through this pandemic as well, and is really improving the internet connectivity there. So hope that answers your question. A little bit of a sort of tutorial on the broad range of internet access available, but I would consider the Khajiit Smart Spot to be very similar to your phone, and it's part of a sort of repertoire of solutions that we're deploying to meet those internet needs where they exist.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move to Student Trustee Hughes.
I believe that was Student Trustee Evans.
Okay, I'm sorry, Trustee Evans.
Okay, through you, Chair. It's possible I missed it, but I was just wondering, has every secondary student that's requested a laptop received one?
I think, you know, I can't say definitively yes. Generally speaking, what happens is we have like a vetting process that tries to triage the requests and put the people who don't have access at all first in line. But generally speaking, I believe that we've satisfied the grade 12 requests that we've got. Certainly, I know that from the latest round, we have more laptops on hand than we had requests in the latest round of the survey. So I would imagine that if we had, we haven't put out all the laptops we've got, in short, but we've met the requests that we've got in the last round.
Perfect, thank you.
Trustee Schooler, you have a question?
Yes, through you, Chair. It seems like we have an abundant number of hardware pieces that we're able to loan out to students. And I'm just wondering about the process of collecting all of the equipment and how that works. Is it a function that is downloaded to the desk of the school principal, or is it something that is managed through your office by your staff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a little of both, to be candid. So, you know, really what we've noticed with the initial recovery effort that we undertook in the summer is that, you know, the short version is it's much easier to get people to come and pick up devices than it is to bring them back. And so, you know, we have about 15% of the devices that we put out that I would say categorize as non-recoverable. So we have ongoing active recovery efforts. In some cases, because we know who's got them and what school they would have been at, we've asked the principal to assist, but it's been predominantly quarterbacked by my staff, who, by the way, I've got 4 Ask UC help desk staff who are making the phone calls, in addition to taking in the 15,000 or so help requests that they receive from teachers over the course of the year. So, you know, those 4 people are working from home and are really busy trying to chase these down. But generally speaking, we know where they are. It's quite a long process. It's certainly not as easy to recover them as it is to hand them out, but staff are continuing to work at that. And to some extent, where principals have been able to help, owing to time or access to the people to have them, they've helped out. In other cases, it's been mostly quarterbacked by my team.
Trustee Pettyjohn, you have a question?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I actually have a comment, not a question, for Superintendent Hobbs. My comment tonight is that a comment of thanks. I was asked to share this comment through me tonight to Superintendent Hobbs and his entire team for the work that they do in assisting with the delivery of devices and assisting parents and students that don't necessarily have the means to continue their education, but are able to stay connected in this very difficult time. So, Jeremy, I want to thank you and your team for all the work that you're currently doing to help all of the kids, the parents, the teachers, and everybody stay connected.
You, Mr. Chair, I just want a note of thanks in response. I know that would be sincerely appreciated by my IT team, led by Jim Guerin, and field staff, led by Tim Martin. I'm really fortunate to work with such a service-oriented group of people, and so I'll pass that along to them and know they'll definitely appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Hobbs. Director, is there another section to this report or not?
Mr. Chair, that concludes our report to the board. Thank you very much for your time and this opportunity.
Thank you very much. We are now proceeding then to 1301, which is a report to the board from private session December the 16th, 2020. At its committee of the whole meeting in private session December the 16th, 2020, 1 property and 2 personnel matters were discussed. 2 recommendations were brought forward to the board. I have a motion moved by Trustee Barry, seconded by Trustee Jacobs, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve Resolution PS 220-12 December 1602, carried in Committee of the Whole private session under Agenda Item D3, December the 16th, 2020. Please cast your ballots.
I'm in favor. I can't. I'm not bidding the thing.
Okay, Larry, thank you.
Chair McAllister, that motion carries. Trustee Barry, I have recorded your vote in favor. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a second motion. It's moved by Trustee Schooler, seconded by Trustee Cram, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve Resolution PS 220, 12 December 1603, carried in Committee of the Whole private session under Agenda Item D3, December 16, 2020. Please cast your ballots.
Again in favor, Barry.
Thank you, Trustee Barry. Chair McAllister, that motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. We're moving into private session now. It's moved by Trustee Danaher, seconded by Trustee McDonald, that the Upper Canada District School Board move into Committee of the Whole January 13th, 2021 at 8:57 p.m. Please cast your ballots.
Again in favor.
Chair McAllister, that motion carries.
Swan as well.
Thank
Trustee
you.
Swan and Trustee Barry, your motion carried. Thank you.
I have a motion moved by Trustee McCray, seconded by Trustee Swan, that Committee of the Whole move into private session January 13th, 2021. Please cast your ballot.
I'm in favor because I already moved into private session. I can't vote.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
In favor.
Chair McAllister, that motion carries.
Thank you. We're going to move into private session, and I will ask you to go to the appropriate agenda item, and I will turn the chair over to Vice Chair